What AI does in helping us code is takes away the drudgery and lets us do the part that's creative and soulful. And what AI does in other creative disciplines, like writing, illustration, is it takes away the soulful part and leaves you with the drudgery. A lot more people are animated by Taylor Swift and Sam Altman. There is this gauntlet thrown down implicitly that people are going to realize where they're going to find out that Sam Altman has taken all of Taylor's songs without consent.
Hi, Rabble.
Hey, Alice.
So this week's guest is Anil Dash. He is many things, a journalist, a tech entrepreneur, and is very committed to trying to put tech in a better direction. We talk about this often in terms of some unintended consequences of where tech has gone, many of them intended. And so Anil doesn't hold back in being outspoken around where technology, the owners of these big tech companies should be behaving better. And so you dig into that a little bit today. But why did you want to bring Anil onto the podcast?
Yeah, I wanted to bring Anil onto the podcast because he is a voice for the open internet, for progressive politics, for technology in a startup ecosystem that serves humanity. And he has been a longtime blogger and someone who writes and talks about this stuff. He serves on the board of the Electronic Frontier Foundation. And so he has both built the companies that we are using today. He was most recently an executive at Fastly. And he also is a critic of what has gone wrong in this world.
Yeah, and your conversation, of course, touches on AI and how AI companies are being run and how they have really kind of, just taken at liberty the content and output of really everybody, everything that was available on the internet. You referred to him as a Prince scholar. You guys talk a little bit too about Taylor Swift. Both of those artists are very well known for reclaiming their intellectual and creative property back from the record publishing companies. And so there was an interesting conversation there around how, maybe Taylor Swift has educated all of us around how important it is to own your output and own the content that you create.
Yeah, absolutely. Anil talks about the way in which Prince and Taylor Swift really put a priority on owning the rights to their music, owning the rights to their intellectual property, their creativity. And that is so interesting today, where all of a sudden, when trillions of dollars are at stake, the AI companies no longer care about that. And at the same time, we couldn't have created this kind of AI system without everyone's contributions, without the sum total of it. So what isn't an alternative way of doing that? What should we be doing to address the fact that we have something that's incredibly powerful, but could not be created without all of us?
Yeah, and we talk about this a lot in the social media world too, around the lack of agency that people have over their own profiles, their usernames, the content that they put out. So anyway, let's jump in and take a listen. It was a really fascinating conversation.
Today I have Anil Dash. Anil is one of the pioneers of the web. I met him when he was the evangelist at 6apart, which was the company behind Movable Type that was really making possible this era of Web 2.0 when people could publish for themselves. And Anil has worked at a whole bunch of companies, served on the board of Stack Overflow, is on the board of EFF, and has really been a progressive voice inside the startup world, inside tech, Silicon Valley, even though neither one of us live anywhere near Silicon Valley. But the sort of mythical idea of Silicon Valley, when we're trying to find what is a thread that is progressive, that is making the world a better place, that is using this technology for democracy and for empowering. And Anil has been someone who has really advocated for ethical technology, including supporting when the employees at Glitch, the company you were CEO of, wanted to form a union. Instead of fighting that, you looked at it as a chance to have a more cooperative relationship. And so I am very excited to have you on. Thank you so much for making your time to come on this podcast, Anil.
Thanks for having me.
I've heard you talk in the past about how the world of social media we have today This idea of a few giant apps that control everything, that control the algorithms, that didn't have to be the future
Yeah.
of social media. And you didn't have to end up in this place. And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about this fact that we could have had an alternate history. And when we were creating the things that became social media, Web 2.0, eventually Instagram and TikTok and Twitter, that single future of centralization and a few people having all the power didn't have to happen.
Well, I think one of the things to remember is for most of the internet's history, it wasn't that, right? So like there's a sort of statistical aberration where for maybe the last decade, the majority of people on the internet, the last several billion people that came online, have known the internet of 5 apps on your phone run by 3 dudes, right? But like for most of the history of the web, and certainly most of the history of the internet, pre-web, it was very diffuse and very decentralized and very local. And so I think like if we can have that broader perspective, and people don't know that history for the most part for a lot of reasons. But if you look at it in that longer time scale and with that broader view, that was the experience of the majority of the time history, of what was the internet, what was the web. And so we've had this kind of distorting effect of recent years and the hyperscale where people sort of think this recent moment is what the web and the internet has always been. And I understand why. Right, because the scale is so much bigger and the social impact is so much bigger and the number of people who are sort of born to that era of the internet is so much bigger. But it is a distortion, right? And it doesn't mean that that's what things always are. And so I think it's sort of, as we have this conversation, I'm in New York City and we have just had a big snowstorm. And so there is, whatever it is, a foot of snow on the ground that hasn't melted away. There has not always been a foot of snow on the ground in Manhattan, right?
Yeah.
And it will be 100 degrees Fahrenheit here this summer. And so things pass, and things have not always been this way. And so I think that's kind of the important thing to remember. And then I think the other part is the rise of the billion scale networks didn't obliterate the existence of the other sites and the other apps.
They're
right?
all still there.
They're all still there. And so I look at, Ravelry or StoryGraph and these other and they're, by the way, millions of users and people use them every day because they love knitting or they love to share what they're reading or whatever it is. And those are wildly popular apps. Like in normal world, those are really big successes. And so I think that's the other thing people forget is if you talk to a normal human from Earth and you say, I made an app and it has millions of users who use it every day, they'd be like, congratulations, that is extraordinary. That is an unbelievably huge success. And it is only through the distorted lens of relatively very recent history that we're like, oh, wow, that's small. And so yeah. I think that's the kind of thing that we have to remember is how that is a wild, outrageous success to have these other things that we forget are even there. And by the way, are, again, human scale, supportable, sustainable, have models that work, have been around for years, will be around for years, are run by teams that are accountable, all those other things. And so that is the internet, numerically, statistically, in terms of where people spend their time, in terms of what most people build, who are builders, that is the internet. And so we spend so much of our time thinking about this handful of things. And I always love food analogies yes, there is McDonald's. Yes, there is, Subway. Yes, there is Burger King. I cannot fathom a person that only eats meals from those places. I don't think that person would survive very long. I don't think that person exists. And so tons of people have home cooked meals and tons of people eat at local restaurants and tons of there's nobody whose favorite restaurant is one of those places. Everyone's I have a corner place that I go that is my, whatever, neighborhood favorite or is run by a friend of mine or my friend opened a restaurant and it makes me thrilled when I go there because they have, our favorite cuisine, whatever it is. And so I think there is that tradition of and maybe even a local chain. It might be our friends in the neighborhood have 3 restaurants, but it's not that they have a global, conglomerate with a massive supply chain of massive number of restaurants, that is a difference in terms of scale, in terms of what it represents in the world. That can be what the internet is, and I just it's so disturbing to me because it's almost impossible to explain because of the way people talk about technology, because of the way people talk about the internet, and yet if you talk to normal people, regular internet users, and they think about it for a second, they can remember, oh, there are these other apps that I use. There are these other experiences that I use. I do see links to those things. I do remember people talking about them, but they have to have their memory jogged.
Yeah. And so we think of the biggest companies, the biggest apps, and we forget, for example, that most traffic on the internet goes to WordPress sites. It doesn't go to Meta and Google and TikTok and everything
sites
else.
Or Shopify sites, like all these other little things that are made by regular people.
And Shopify is a great example because Shopify is this thing where it is a centralized service, but it's not run in a top-down way. Like if you want to leave Shopify and take your domain names and set up a shop with a different kind of app, it's yours. And they have economies of scale and they connect people and everything else. And there's a reason why you would use Shopify rather than just install your own software, similar to the reason why some people would use Substack versus installing Ghost. But there is something about the way in which things go viral. We had this idea, the concept of the meme was this idea virus back in the 90s. And now we've lost connection to the idea that it's an idea virus. And it still has that aspect to it, but now it's this almost sort of mass market potential thing that generates huge amounts of money.
The WordPresses of the world aren't built against the grain of the web, right? You can build a site with WordPress, with Squarespace, all these tools we're talking about, and still be of the web. What you are building is not separate from the web. It is not fighting the web. It is contributing to the web. And, we haven't codified the set of traits that make something of the web, right? It's a little bit of like, I'll know it when I see it. And we need to get more specific about it. We need to have that litmus test that is like, did what you created meet that test? Is it generative to the web or is it subtractive of the web? And, if we can capture that set of traits, if we can have that, that bar that you have to clear, I think it'd be the kind of thing where we would be seen as whether you are being of the social good or not. And it's important because there's just extremely high cost to having very, very large platforms that are extractive to the web, where first they start with like, oh, well, you have to be logged in to get here. And then they have, well, we're going to, take content from the web and put it behind here. And now it's gotten very extreme, right? Where mass scale LLMs are this very, very clear example where they are just sort of strip mining content from the rest of the web for profit, without compensation to creators, very explicitly, without citation in some cases to creators, and then say like, what's the problem? And it's like, well, this is, like a pure colonialist mind frame towards like what the entire rest of the web is for. It's like, well, why wouldn't I just use you for raw materials? And it's like, if you extend this to any other domain, no pun intended, any other context in the world, and you did this non-consensually, people would immediately understand. And if you were like, well, it's legal, it's like, yeah, but it's creepy as hell. Like, it is legal.
It's only legal if you have billions of dollars.
I think that's one part. But even if let's say you don't, it is technically legal in the United States to go up to someone's window from the street. I take a photo through their window of the inside of their home, including ostensibly their children, their pets, whatever's in there. Take that photo and then sell it. You can do that because it's visible from the street. I think you'd be an unbelievable creep. You would have to be a despicable person to do this. And if somebody was like, well, I flew my drone to your window and just took a whole bunch of photos continuously, maybe video of your family, and sold it on the internet. And then you were like, you are an unbelievable creep to do that without consent. And their response to you is like, hey, it's legal. why are you complaining? People would be like, that person's a psychopath. And then if you do the exact same thing on the web, which is a thing that people do, which is like, I have photos of family members on Flickr that were Creative Commons licensed because of the social context in which that decision was made 20 years ago was different. And then people have taken those without consent, commercialized them, trained AI models on them. And I know that people can reproduce that entire image set, right, verbatim for commercial purpose. And then say, well, why are you objecting? Because you just literally did what I just described. Like, you might as well have flown a drone up to my window. And I don't think Sam Altman is stupid and misunderstands why that's creepy. I don't believe he is. And so, like, that's the part that is really, vexing to me after all these years, to be like, we're not, the rest of the world that's like kind of outside of the context that we've been in all these years is still like, well, maybe he's stupid. Like, that's how they act.
He's not stupid.
And I'm like, I don't think he is. I think he's a very smart person who has a lot of money and a lot of lawyers and a lot of resources. And I think we should treat him like he is a grown up with a lot of resources, a lot of lawyers, a lot of money, and be like, you know damn well you're being a creep.
It's not just the stealing all the content. He also has WorldCoin with this orb that like scans your eyeball and does other things like that. And
and he knows he's not subject to it. I mean, that's the sort of thing with like WorldCoin and the eye scanning eyeball stuff and all that kind of stuff. He's like, well, I have nothing to hide, or I would do it, or whatever. And it's like, it is different when you have a compound on your private island that you can retreat to say that you don't have privacy concerns. And I think that's the, the sort of, again, the frustrating thing with these things is that we don't sort of plainly speak about what the implications are, and the retreat to, is it technically legal? Is it a thing I can get away with? And then, of course, to your point, and what is legal is very different when you're a billionaire, right? I just think having a more honest conversation about like who is affected by these things, what are we doing, and who are we doing these things to, and then reckoning with that, right? Like, if we can have the honest conversation, then we can talk about what these technologies actually are, because we're in this place where they know they can move fast enough to just say, like, look at this shiny thing it does.
Yeah.
And shiny's
cool?
easy. Yeah. And shiny's easy, and the hard part is the damage done, or putting the genie back in the bottle or whatever. And I think that strategy over and over and over of like, run really fast towards showing people something shiny, and maybe they won't notice the damage done. Like, we've been doing that for 20 plus years
Silicon
now.
Valley's that's tech's model. Like, tech's model is that we are able to move much faster than any kind of regulation, much faster than anyone kind of has understanding of it. We go in, we bring incredibly disruptive technologies, and then they restructure major parts of the economy, break it down, reduce the amount of increase productivity and reduce the amount of value that could be extracted. But whoever does that breaking down controls the smaller portion of the thing that's left, and makes tremendous amount of wealth.
Of the industry itself. And so we've repeated this playbook, year after year after year for, the better part of 2 decades. All of us who've been in that space or adjacent to it now know that is the playbook. And we know what happens to the ashes of the industry that's left over. Right. And again, like, I live in New York City, and I think one of the things that people outside the city don't realize about, like, we had this, I guess, very visible mayoral election. Mamdani getting elected. Yeah. And, but, it's hard to know what translates outside of the city. But one of the things I think people don't really realize is one of the first things that Mayor Mamdani did that got him visibility at a citywide level was he was involved in the hunger strike that taxi drivers had. And that really was catalyzed by a series of suicides from drivers who had been driven into desperation because their medallions had become worthless, and the taxi medallions had been, artificially inflated, in value, because these things were sort of this artificial scarcity of permits from the city. But the reason that, these medallions had crashed in value was because the ride-hailing apps had illegally entered the market and completely changed the nature of driving and hailing rides in the city. And now, obviously there was a cabal around taxi driving and these medallions in the city. And like, should that regulatory environment have been what it was? No. Should there have been reform there? Yes. Is the way you reform things by launching an app that just breaks the law? I don't think it ought to be. And so as a result, there should have been some regulatory protection for, these drivers who did things the right way. They immigrated to this country. They were told the system works this way. They did what they were supposed to do. They worked incredibly hard. And I think importantly, they pulled the resources of their entire community and risked their personal reputations to say, okay, well, let's all go in together and we'll buy these $1 million medallions and I'll pay you all back by working hard, right? Like, this is the promise of why you come to this country. And then through no fault of their own, outside bad actors said, we're going to destroy the value of the biggest asset you own, even though you did the right thing by us breaking the law, and you will bear the brunt of us breaking the law. And when we do, the people in City Hall will say, we're innovators. We'll say, we're innovators. We're doing good. And when you say, but our biggest asset is worthless, won't return your calls. They will herald us as heroes and they won't return your calls. And, and that happened in city after city. It's not just New York. The mayor of Pittsburgh said, like, these are our heroes, right? We're going to welcome Uber in here, even after they ransacked everybody at CMU that was, working on robotics and hired them all away. And this happened so many times. And I think that idea of like, we're going to reward the bad actors and penalize the people who do things the way you're supposed to. And, and I think it was really important that one of the things that people, I think, who are more removed from being immigrants don't understand is like, people were coming in the case of the United States here because of the rule of law, right? Like a thing that people were drawn to for a long time was like, oh, it's a fair system. And then you can be an entrepreneur, literally be an entrepreneur because of the rule of law, right?
Yeah.
And so like that trade-off or that betrayal of that system, I think is one of the fundamentals of what our mythology is about technology. It enables you to be an entrepreneur. And, it's something that I had believed in so much because I was that guy, right? The child of immigrants, started a company, wrote software, was told you can go and be, back in those days, Bill Gates. People don't say that as much anymore. And I think it's really important to be able to sort of string those things together because like, who gets to be that person and build that thing? And what is hard work? What is entrepreneurship? And then they even tried to do the right thing where the drivers in New York had pulled their resources together, built a co-op and built an app for ride hailing. But again, they couldn't get the resources that the people who broke the law got. And so you
building a two-sided marketplace is incredibly hard. I mean, that's
exactly. And if you're not hyper-financialized, it's impossible, right, in that marketplace. And so I come all the way through. I mean, I think you understand all the pieces, but I come all the way through to say, like, there's a part here where, like, that pattern, that's the ride-hailing one, that is a thing that helped, in this case, Mayor Mamdani sort of establish his reputation. And I think it's something that was kind of invisible to people outside the city. Like, that was the thing that earned trust and credibility with workers because it was that important to people, where people saw, like I said, more than a dozen drivers lost their lives because they were ashamed to their community, right? Where they were like, I have lost, my community's money, but also their trust, and cannot win it back because the city won't give me relief. And he was able to get, about, I think, almost $500 million in relief, won eventually after this hunger strike that was weeks and weeks and weeks of these folks, on City Hall steps. But like, that's pretty extreme. You know what I mean? And that wasn't going to happen for people that had suffered similarly from Airbnb, and is not going to happen for every other app, as we sort of go down the list. And so that's the kind of thing where, like, we're in that
But it could
same
happen. Like we could easily say, look, we've decided that societally we're better using ride-hailing apps than the way in which you called in a phone number or hailed a taxi in the past. This is going to change the economic values. The medallion doesn't have value. Therefore, you have to pay out for the industry you've disrupted.
They easily could have paid for retraining, right? Like easily could have said, hey, cost of entry for Uber, Lyft, whatever, when you come to this city is these retraining dollars or these medallion compensation dollars or some combination thereof. And it would have been a rounding error.
And they were flooded with VC money and late-stage VC money to roll it out once they got the model working. It wasn't that hard. We see the same thing with AI, where we see these large AI companies take the sum total of human intellectual creation. Like anything that we can digitize, they've done, and they've put it into the systems, and then say that this is a massive privatization and that the weights and the results of this aren't something that's open and held by everyone. They aren't a public good.
And that can't possibly be the case, right?
Yeah.
So
the only way it can exist is if it's a public good.
Right. I belabor that example with the drivers because we are in this reckoning again, and we are in the middle of it right now. One of the teams I'm trying to help right now is a team that's working on, how do we build another sort of marketplace for compensation for creators and IP holders. I think a lot of folks are working on this right now. And I look at this where I start with consent, right? Like so many of these things are about consent. And one, I think it's very telling that you just never hear this word out of a lot of the folks building these platforms. I mean, I guess in light of how many of these folks are in the Epstein files, it probably makes more sense we don't hear the word consent a lot. But
turns out they don't care about us consent that much.
Yeah.
But they know what it is.
But we come back to, the data piece of this and the larger ecosystem piece of this. There is this understanding. I keep talking to people. So my people who know me know I'm a big fan of Prince, the singer that was popular in the 80s and 90s. And, one of his fundamental principles.
You're a Prince scholar. You're not just a fan.
I am. And, but the thing that, people who are not fans or casual fans might not know is like one of his guiding principles that he wanted to be remembered for was this phrase, if you don't own your masters, then your masters own you, talking about his master recordings. But he was a big believer in intellectual property rights for creators. And, that was something that's really radical in the 80s and 90s. Like people weren't talking about it as much. But now, whereas people looked at him like he was crazy back then, now we have an entire generation that has grown up listening to Taylor's version.
Yep.
Right.
They all know that she reclaimed her intellectual property.
And that's the thing to me that's this revelation. Like I'm so excited about that because I think a lot more people are animated by Taylor Swift than Sam Altman. Right. And so there is this gauntlet thrown down implicitly that people are going to realize where they're going to find out that Sam Altman has taken all of Taylor's songs without consent.
Yep.
And they're going to be like, well,
he's taken everyone's songs.
Right. But those, right, that she spent a decade fighting for and paid $1 billion for are going to be really, really catalyzing for people because it's a very personal violation of something she has articulated incredibly well. And she's a person that means something to like 100 million people. Mm-hmm. And so like at some point that's going to out. And I think that's going to be clarifying for people where all of a sudden that it lays bare, like, because there's all these abstractions, right? I'm talking about intellectual property and people aren't lawyers and talking about, commercial exploitation and people aren't lawyers. But people are like, wait, she just got these back. And you're telling me that the ChatGPT people took Taylor's songs again and are going to try and profit off of them again. And I think that thing is going to be seen as a bridge too far. And you don't have to be a lawyer to get it. And people will, I know, say, well, but tactically there's this, and this, and this, and this, right? And like, I am a believer in fair use. Like I love remix culture and I love, the creativity of fair use. So like, I'm not and I'm a big defender of it. I'm on the board of EFF and I believe in it. And I think commercial exploitation is like, you better pay. Like I think there's no contradiction there. But also, above all things, like have a conversation with an artist and get consent. Like that is just the ethical thing to do. And so I think that's the part I'm really pushing for and agitating for is like, what is it about their businesses that they do not believe and have confidence that creators, the most brilliant creators in the world, the most valued and respected creators in the world, won't give them consent? Why don't they think they could get consent? Like that's a really telling thing. Because like I know when I'm writing stuff for my personal site, I've been blogging for like 25 plus years. Every single time I ask somebody, can I excerpt this? Can I use this video? Can I put this image up? They always say yes. I never have any problems clearing content. So like, it seems like a personal problem
But
for them.
You're working within the network, you're working within the web, you link back to it, you give credit. So one of what was a side project a couple months ago blew up. I was like, what would happen if we brought back Vine?
Yep.
And I was like, how hard could it be with modern technology and protocols, everything else, and vibe coding? And turns out that it took about as much time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the first version took a weekend, which is took the same amount of time that the Twitter prototype took. And then I went down the rabbit hole and I'm like, can I find the old videos and everything else? And I found that the Internet Archive, our friends, had saved a copy of the Vines, all of them, but in an accessible format. They're amazing. Yeah. And so I went in and I'm like, okay, how can I put this back? And 5,000 people may like this app. They'll think it's really cool. It's a bit of internet history, everything else. It blew up and I had 150,000 people try and download the app the first day, and now I'm back in the world of okay, am I building a startup again in scale? But the thing that I found fascinating is now I've gone back and I've talked to all of these old Viners and I've talked to people who worked at Vine and I've talked to all these people in the thing. And Vine had this convention like RT for retweeting called IB, which was the inspired by. And so Vine had a social convention around giving credit and around linking back to people. And so you could collaborate, like you made this video with someone, it wasn't just mine, and then you had inspired by. And so what I did over the last couple of days was okay, how do I build inspired by back into the
IB
core?
graph? Yeah.
How do I build the IB graph back in so that in the future you can always give that credit back? And so
here's the thing.
Those Viners don't lose who was the person who came up with that dance? Who was the person who came up with these ideas?
So the reason Vine had IB built into its culture is because Vine is culture. Like Vine was generative to culture. Like Vine is really important to culture. And the reason that 150,000 people signed up is because Vine was something that created culture in the world. That's why it was so important and why it was such a loss when it shut down. And also why the absence of Vine begat TikTok, right? Culturally, right? There was an absence that was waiting to be filled. And it's still, people still know the phrase, do it for the Vine, like a decade plus after it's been gone, right? And so I felt such a void after Vine was shut down. Like I really, it was so important culturally, and it's been very exciting to see this sort of new incarnation of it come back. But IB was also a direct descendant of Tumblr-style reblogging, right? And these are parts of New York City blog culture, right? So Tumblr's reblogging and Tumblrlogging in general formed in New York City, right? And I'm going to nerd out because I think you'll appreciate it. So the first reblogging was built as a system at an art atelier here in New York City called iBeam, which is where Jonah Peretti was before he worked on Huffington and iBeam. And this sort of art studio, they had built a tool called Reblog on Movable Type, the platform I was working on at the time as a plugin. And to give you an idea of what a generative moment this was, the plugins that were being created for Movable Type at the time were Reblog, where you could repost somebody's thing and cite it, and Markdown, which now runs approximately all of AI, right?
Yes.
AI
can't exist. We can't do anything without Markdown.
Right. So you could make a plugin at that time and it could have some impact on the internet. And, the concept of Reblog seemed fairly obvious, but the semiotics of it, the mechanics of it were really important to get right in terms of how you cite and how you were sort of quoting and keeping context, right? And this is important because there was another way of linking to and citing things at the time, which old timers will remember, called trackback, and later WordPress would do a thing called pingback. But these ideas were like linking to something on another site, but they weren't bringing that context over. And all this tracks back.
You were doing the
links back
curation part.
Exactly. And there's, at this point now, 75 years of hypertext theory going back to Ted Nelson that sort of is all, connecting into. But the key was there's this conversation people have been talking about concept called transclusion and how you link to these things. There is theory, right? This is stuff that people are teaching classes on at the Interactive Telecommunications program at NYU. There is an academic history to this. There are people who have, like I said, theorized about this for decades. And that is the kind of thing that VC culture today won't even concede exists, right?
Yeah.
And it's really, really important because there's an almost conditioned, intentional lack of history, right? Because like on the technical side, you can know the entire history of programming languages back to the first line written for the first C compiler. But if you go to the theory or like how do products happen, we're always at the beginning of history. And it's really important to know that history of how products happen, how decisions are made, because then you can learn how mistakes happen, how were people harmed, or how did things go right? And so that chain of like how reblogging developed. And so like there's this sort of, the movable type version of it at iBeam. And then David Karp and Marco, Arment are making Tumblr, and they make a much more elegant, streamlined version in Tumblr. And then the Vine team sees it and they're like, we're going to evolve this into the video context, and you get IB, right? And there's this continuous evolution. Right. Revining comes in there. And, and retweets were inspired by the Tumblr version of it, but took on a different sort of variation because they came up through the community. So they weren't sort of product first, they were community first. And so like all these different things are all, like different forks and branches, but they all come up through this. And part of it for me is, I don't think it's a coincidence that these are literally physically in the environments where the art galleries are in New York City. You know what I mean? Like, I think that part of like you are inspired by art around you is really key. And these are the things that happen importantly at human scale networks, right? These are all still small enough that I can name the people that were building the products, right?
Yeah.
Like it is a tiny, tiny number of people that are building it. They are not billion scale platforms where the people that are making them are faceless product managers that are trying to achieve KPIs, right? There are people still invested in and part of the communities. They use the products, right? And so that thing is a fundamental difference in the reason for the existence of the products and the accountability that the people making the products have to the users of the products. They can be known to them, and also you can buttonhole them at an event, a meetup of the users of the product if they screw up, which would never happen now, right? If somebody does something horrible in a product decision for, Instagram, when would they ever be accosted for it?
Yeah, I mean, they're not showing up to events. There would be angry comments on things. Or, take, for example, when the Reddit mods had a rebellion over AI content and the shutting down of third-party apps, this essentially the mods lost. Like they tried to organize a strike. It was labor organizing among Reddit mods because they didn't want third-party apps to be blocked out. They didn't want the Reddit content to be sold off to these AI companies for mining.
Right.
And the funny thing is, a few years before, when Blue Sky was just getting started, the Reddit people were actually talking about doing something like app protocol for Reddit to decentralize Reddit. And so that you could leave. And then they discovered that actually that power of the structure of the technology, of the closed source nature of it, of the centralized nature of it, meant that they could, when the mods rebelled, they could, they had no labor rights. They had no, laws that let them organize unions. And so all of the rebellious mods lost their things. And
there is this thing too, where having had a front row seat to the creation of Stack Overflow, I saw the founders were genuine in wanting to empower mods and all people on the platform. And so one of the ways in which they were sincere about it was giving people ownership of their work. But they did it through Creative Commons licensing of the content. And so you could take your content and, go and do whatever you wanted to. And, for many years, it was great. So like if you had somebody who's really great at answering every Python question on the site, they could take them all and did make books out of them and stuff like that. But that's also why it was the first and deepest place that people train their AI bots to scrape, right? Because they're like, well, I have Creative Commons rights. I can take all this and, train my LLM to be really great at coding. And so there was the sort of highest price tragedy of the commons. And there was no, being able to see it, watch that data being scraped and see the impact it had on the community. There was
knowing it was going to kill the community.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was...
Or did you even know it at the time that that's what was
Yeah, I mean, you knew it would have an impact, right? I think there was an open question about how much people cared about the human interaction part. And part of it was at that early days, the first wave of LLMs were not good at the social interaction part, right? Because keep in mind, chat was not the first interface to GPTs, right? Yeah. Like Chat GPT was not, they didn't even think, OpenAI didn't even think it was going to be.
It was like a weird side project.
Right. It was like a hack before the holidays. So that wasn't really a primary interface. And still may not even be the best interface for a lot of things, but that's a sort of separate challenge. So that part was like, even though it's good at indexing, it wasn't sure it was the right interface. But the other part was, trying to think of how to succinctly articulate this. So at that time, Stack Overflow had been around more than 10 years. Many times over that first, let's say, decade, Google has what they call one box, which is like if you type in a common query, it'll just put the answer at the top, right? So, how many miles between New York and LA? 2,900 miles or whatever it is. And if they think it's easier than taking you into a page that you have to click through, they'll just put the answer up there. And then increasingly, Google would one box up answers where they just could profit from putting it on the page rather than letting you go through. So one of the big areas they first did that with was like airline tickets, where they would put in their affiliate link and just let you book the flight on United instead of going to United's site. And they're like, we'll take the affiliate link here. And what would happen is you'd ask your programming question and they would just put the answer up instead of sending you to Stack Overflow. And that would obviously decimate traffic to Stack Overflow. And, it was sort of like a not a fair exchange. And so the first time they did that, there was, I think it was the product manager or somebody had a meeting with Google and was like, look, this is going to really damage the site, but also like it's bad for like you because then there won't be like people fixing the answers. Like you don't know if that's a good answer for people to upvote or whatever, right? Like just because it's the first answer doesn't mean it's the right answer. And so that worked and they fixed it and said, okay, go to the site. And like every 18 months thereafter for the next many years, like a new product manager or VP would come in and then try it again. And then you have the conversation with them again. And the mechanism was essentially shame, because you would say, hey, Google, you're going to look bad if you do this and your coders all use Stack Overflow and you don't want to have to tell your employees or your community that you screwed up a site that they all love. And in those days, Google still had the like either don't be evil or we're trying to be good version of themselves. And so they would do things.
Shame worked.
Out of trying not to be shamed. And, obviously post 2017, 18, the entire industry decided that they didn't want to be shamed, like post Daymore or so. And so you stopped being able to say, don't do this thing because it makes you look bad. So then you had to make a business case at the very best. But for the most part, they're like, we don't care. And Google was kind of the last of the ones that was like, we're going to at least try to be nice, right? Facebook kind of never cared about that. And then everything since then, like most of the product managers at OpenAI used to work at Facebook, right? They're ex-Meta. And if you joined...
That tells you the ethics.
Right. If you were a person that joined Meta after they enabled the Rohingya genocide, and then you went to work at OpenAI, and you're like, hey, why does your product tell teenagers to self-harm? They're gonna be like, what's the problem? Got to break some eggs and make an omelet, right? Like, that's on you. That's not, then you're like, hey, you're hurting my business. They're like, that's not even a kid that's dying. Like, that's just somebody's company. Like, who cares?
Why should we care about your business?
Your business isn't even, children. And so that thing, like the bar is moved so far. Like if you're already making a product that tells children to end their lives, like, hey, this is impacting my profit margins, is like a rounding error, right? It's nothing. And then if the reward for making a product that tells children to end their lives is we are going to sell this to schools and people will enthusiastically say it's the future that every kid needs to learn how to use, the world's upside down. That's crazy. But like, I don't know about you, but like my kid's school, I had to have a conversation with them and be like, you guys are out of your minds if you put this product in front of kids. But if I hadn't said that and been very dramatic about it, I don't know. I think every school in America is having a conversation.
I have two kids that are 15 and 18, and I had the conversation today about how they were using, large language models in ChatGPT and what they were doing with it and how they used it as a research tool, but also how other kids in the class had,
we talk about it regularly.
turned in
and I'm
papers.
lucky.
Yeah.
But like, I have a 15-year-old, but like when LLMs were first getting popular for kids to use maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I ran a local one and I was very lucky because the demo actually ended up being perfect inadvertently. So I asked the LLM about me and because I have a Wikipedia page, so like it works, right? So it was like, an entrepreneur in New York or whatever. And like, cool. And then I was like, and what about personal life? And it made up 2 children that I don't have. So then I could tell my kid, see, like, there you go. That's LLMs. Right? Like,
Yeah.
You're not in there and like Bobby and Jill are here. It's like, what else do you need to know? And it was like a perfect object lesson of like, you can't trust it. And I couldn't have asked for a better demo about like, don't do your homework like that, but I should have rigged it to actually do that. But I think the thing I come back around is like, what percentage of parents are, they're busy and they're working. What percentage of them have the technical fluency to think that Google would intentionally ship a product where when you type in a search term, it's going to tell you something that's not right? Like they spent 25 years trying to get the answers to be better. Why would they make something that makes the answers worse? Right? It wouldn't occur to them like, oh, well, they're going to go with this sort of indirect thing that over time might get better. You know what I mean? Like that's just not going to occur to them. And so that's a societal risk that a product manager whose comp depends on a KPI that's adoption of Gemini will make. But, like I said, a busy parent who's like, I just Googled this, it must be true on the way to picking up their kid from soccer practice is never going to understand that. Like those things have got to have a higher social cost because shame doesn't work anymore.
And you've written a bunch about the way in which the AI companies are implying exactly the same playbook from Napster to YouTube to Meta and Facebook and everything else. So if we had the open web and blogging and activity streams and mashups and everything else 20 years ago as this open alternative, and that commons, not all of it, but there were large portions of that commons that was enclosed and taken over. And instead of being governed by this community of users who contributed to it, we anointed princes. And we said, you 3 or 4 guys, you get to decide what speech is acceptable in the world, what speech gets seen to the world, and what algorithms we have and how does it work. So now AI is upending the world of software. It's, as much as software was eating the world, Mark Andreessen's thing, now we have AI eating the world. And that's why we're spending, we, the economy, are spending trillions of dollars on this thing, is because there's a belief that...
Well, we didn't choose it. Like 10 dudes chose it, but they are doing it.
Yeah. Well, 10 dudes convinced the financial markets that's where we should reallocate, capital.
Yeah.
So how do we resist that?
Well, I put it the other way, right? Which is, I don't think 10 dudes convinced the financial markets to it. I think 10 dudes chose to do it, and the financial markets don't have a choice but to go along with it. Zuckerberg is a good example. He decided by fiat that they were going to be Meta and be the metaverse and then be AI. Like there wasn't some consultation
Yeah.
right?
He
Like
just spent
first they went
$85 billion on the metaverse, and now he's
right,
spending $180 billion on AI.
right. So like first it was like, no legs metaverse, and then it was AI, and like I think AI is more real than their metaverse misadventures were, but the strategy of how and why, like there's not some like reasoned discussion. Like I think one of the things that's really, really clear that people should be saying out loud is like, these are fashion trends for these guys, right? And like some of them are more real than others, but like, has anybody even been like, hey, how are your NFTs doing, guys? Like they spent billions on NFTs, billions, right? Like you can still add an NFT to your profile on Twitter, and people aren't doing that. Like I don't see any .eth screen names for people anymore, and they were all in, right? Like they're just fashion trends. That is literally a fashion trend. Like there are no monkey pictures for their avatars and .eth and their names. Those were fashion trends, and they will tell you that they were these well-reasoned, things that they deduced through careful analysis, right? And it's like, come on, man! Like hemlines go up, hemlines go down. Do you know what I mean? Like on Wednesdays we wear pink. Okay, like
Yeah.
that's
And the NFT stuff is interesting because anybody who objectively looked at it could see that there's no there. Like it's like what you're owning is the signature that links to
sure.
something, and the collective
mean-
fiction that there's something known. And
do you know my history there? I don't know.
no, I don't know too much, but I wanted to bring up the Moxie Marlinspike, who created Signal, eventually comes up with this essay where he's just like, the emperor has no clothes.
I think even better is Molly White, right? Like Molly White is an incredible. All she did was factually describe the reality, right? And she's like one of the great bloggers I think of the last 10 years. But what was interesting was there was so much vituperation towards her for it, and what's funny is almost exclusively all that she did was pull quotes. She literally just had factual citations, like almost zero editorializing. Like she wasn't like, you guys suck, look at you dummies, look at this thing. Like literally just like, this is what happened. This is a factual statement of what happened. It was like sunrise was at 6:28, sunset was at 7:01. You know what I mean? And people were like, how could you say this about the sun? You know what I mean? And that's a really telling thing, when people have that kind of strong feeling. When the blockchain stuff was sort of first getting attention in 2014, I worked with an artist, Kevin McCoy, here in New York, and we did an art project at the new museum, which was basically like, I've always been really fascinated with title assertions, specifically because of the artist thing. Like artists should be able to claim their work. And so we did a thing on Namecoin that was just like, be able to claim your work and you could sort of trade it. People are like, it's kind of interesting. And then nobody cared for like 5+ years. And then later, when the sort of, blockchain bubble starts to take off, people described it as the first NFT. We didn't use the term NFT. I think that name sucks and whatever. Yeah. But what was telling was like, obviously we knew the idea, the concept of being able to digitally sign a work and assert it on the blockchain so that it could be verified or validated is interesting. It has limited utility, but in some abstract concept, it's interesting. And that's exactly what I said. It has very limited utility, but in this one narrow place, like you could probably have, it's like, if you're not already interested in like spreadsheets, this probably shouldn't be interesting to you. Certainly, like no more people that are interested in CSV should be interested in NFTs. People lost their minds, right? But they couldn't say that I didn't know what I was talking about because I had shown 10 years prior or whatever, like I was already geeking out on this.
You'd done it. You'd set it up.
And so that thing when they can't dismiss you, the same as with Moxie, on technical grounds, and then you say, I am a technical expert at this, and I'm telling you it cannot do the things you are asserting socially that it can do, is infuriating to people. And we are there with LLMs again, right? Where I'm like, it is not a magical potion, right? There is a half century of history of learning systems, okay? And if you didn't find, Bayesian systems, like Bayesian learning models, interesting, and all of a sudden LLMs are magical to you, I am skeptical. Okay. Right. Like there is or whatever system you want to point to, like there is a long history here, and these are a leap forward, undoubtedly, but they are part of a long, long context. And if all of a sudden you're like, this is the magic beans, right? And you're making assertions about a domain that you didn't have any interest or expertise in before, I'm very skeptical. And so that's the part that I worry about. And I think the other great frustration I have is like some of the best engineers and coders I know are like, I can do stuff with this, but I don't want to touch it because of the people who are associated with it and the things they're saying about it. And because the temperature's gone up so high that normal people, everything they hear about is it's stealing stuff from artists that I love. And then, and I think there's a sort of set of concerns that are approximately environmental concerns, taking content without consent, displacing jobs, being run by people whose economic concerns are terrible. Like sort of, there's 4 or 5 of these very legitimate concerns. And they're like, those are all valid. How do I get one that doesn't touch any of that stuff? You know what I mean? And it's like, it's a pretty good question. And so, and I think there are models that address each of those individual things, but almost none that hit all of them all at once.
I was blown away at how virulent the anti-AI sentiment was, because when I announced Divine, I'm like, I don't like watching the AI slop videos, so I'm going to find a way using some friends of mine's human right tech to verify the things came from a real phone and a real camera and everything else. And I'd known about this proof mode, C2PA verification stuff for a long time. And it was just like this esoteric way of verifying cameras were real.
Mm-hmm.
And they were using it for human rights. And so I was just like, oh, this is cool. I'll throw it in there and everything else. And then it blew up, which is just like Vine's back and no AI slop. And the level at which people's reactions to that blew me away. Because
off the charts. Yeah.
I use the technology. I use I use Claude Code all the time. That's how I built it so quickly as a one-person project. And, I'm deeply worried that we have taken the commons of all humanity and we have privatized it. And so I think that some of these open source things and asserting rights say, no, you can't take everybody's copyright things and remix it and then just privatize that and not hand it back out and not have, accountability and everything else. But the depth at which people have a backlash against AI is so much more profound than anyone working in tech understands.
They don't get it. And there's a couple of reasons why. I think first and foremost, what AI does in helping us code is takes away the drudgery and lets us do the part that's creative and soulful.
Yeah, it's so much fun. It's playful.
Right. And what AI does in other creative disciplines, like writing, illustration, is it takes away the soulful part and leaves you with the drudgery. And so people...
miserable.
Are left with the misery, right? And I say this because I'm both a writer and a coder. And so people have the opposite experience where they're like, how could you possibly like this thing that is taking away the part that is the joy? And you are at cross purposes, right? And meanwhile, like with my coder brain on, I'm like, God, finally, I'm back into the part of coding that I love, right?
No more syntax problems.
Exactly. So that's one of the very first huge schisms about you're seeing the complete opposite side of this technology. And then the second part is people are reacting to their feelings about the tech industry writ large, which is about the only parts they see, which are the execs, right? So you have this handful of tycoons, the richest people in the world. They are dabbling in stuff like going into space. They are consorting with the worst people in the world, like Jeffrey Epstein. They are, as far as we can see, firing everybody in sight. And while they're doing it, being absolutely brazen, right? So, Elon Musk going on social media and saying horrible things or making child abuse material or sharing Nazi memes, right? And if those are the people who are making AI, and they are, I don't like it. You know what I mean? I'm like, why would I want that tool, right? And by the way,
Peter
on the
Thiel,
side,
who can't even say that he wants humanity to survive.
right, and has been saying for years that he wants to. He wished that women couldn't vote, or whatever it is, right? And so like, if those are the people making these tools, and also they will put every artist I know out of their home, like, yeah, that tool sucks, right? And so then from the like day-to-day coders lens, they're like, oh, I've always hated those guys. I've never seen those guys as tech. Those guys are financiers. They're not tech. They don't write any code. They have nothing to do with me. Everybody I know in code is peers like me that write code. By the way, a bunch of my friends have been laid off. So we're beleaguered by AI too. And I'm judging it by the thing I have running in my local dev environment. And have you seen this thing that I've been using? Right. So it's completely a different lens, and people are saying different things. Like the word means a different thing. And not having empathy for the fact that, like, if you're not deep inside this cohort, tech is a thing that happens to you. It's not a thing that you use. It's not a thing you have control over. It is merely, at best, the thing when you're writing an email that jumps in front of your cursor because somebody has a KPI at Google and is like, I'm the worst clip you've ever seen in your life, and I'm going to get in front of you trying to write an email or trying to write a doc and make it worse. And so, like, that part is, and I have all the empathy
you have no
in the world
agency
for, like,
in that world.
right.
It's like the internet we weren't trying to build. The internet we were trying to build was this internet that has built on open source and free software where everybody has the ability to shape it and we build it together and it's a commons. And that internet exists, but that is not the internet that people who just use prepackaged software see.
100%. And even when we say that, our super techie cohort is like, oh, well, I just went 47 levels deep into the Google Docs settings and then downloaded a browser extension, and I was able to disable Gemini getting into my Google Docs. So why don't you just do that? And so there's this huge disconnect about the lived experience here, where they're like not even describing the same internet, and the same experience. And so that thing about that feeling of like tech happens to you is so unnerving. And then again, even at a more lived level, who has their, aunt and uncle sending them memes on Instagram and Facebook of AI slop that is,
and they can't tell,
radicalizing them, and they don't know that it's slop, right? And again, we were like, I can tell because of this, this, and this, because I have this media fluency, because I'm privileged enough to be in tech, which has made me wealthy, which has given me the free time to be able to learn media fluency, right? And so, like, there's all these layers. And then the last part, I don't want to go too far in this room, but I think it's really important. So many of us in tech or tech adjacent have also been able to have a income that lets us support a spouse, a partner, a roommate who then works in a nonprofit, in education, in government, in all these social good areas, right? That sort of then lifts people up. And like, as 500,000 people plus in the US have been laid off in tech, so too falls that network that holds those people up, right? So like, we're going to see this second order collapse.
And especially in the United States.
Yes.
In the United States, we don't have this massive social safety net that's supporting it. So we've been using our social network, our actual interpersonal network to support
our surplus income. The surplus
culture.
Income from working in tech has been the subsidy for the tattered remains of the social safety net. And people can feel that. So when they say, I hate AI, they're like, it doesn't just put me out of work. It puts out of work the person who was the thin thread that was holding up that other part of social safety net. So like, all that to say, when people are like, I hate this AI stuff, like, that's really what they're saying is like, this is the one place I can plant a flag and say, enough. I can stop the advance of this thing, because I can't name all the other places that tech is in my life for being inflicted on me. Like, I can't say I don't want to be, like, speaking of myself personally, it's like Anil Dash, like, I don't want to be on Facebook, right?
No.
But or WhatsApp.
But you don't want to lose you don't want to lose connection to your aunts and uncles and cousins and school friends and everyone else.
Right, exactly. Like I have family in India. I have to be on WhatsApp. I have like school stuff with a kid. You got to be on Facebook groups, right? Like when I'm going to be like, I have a principled stance that I can't know when the kid's like, school concert is. Right? You're like, you're going to be that guy? They can't be that guy. And so like that stuff is like the social coercion is so powerful, and Facebook knows it. And also, like, I'm not going to convince 100 other parents to get on this janky open source group communication tool. It's like all this to say, you can't draw the line on any of this stuff, but this is the one thing where we're like, finally, people who have been fed up can say, no, I can see this thing creeping, and this is the one place I can go. And I think inside tech, where people are like, they have more agency, more control. They know how to flip the switches, turn the knobs. They know that, in my case, like I have a local LLM, open source, open weights, runs on my own machine, trained on my own writing. All the data that's used in the training model was consensually gathered. Like my machine is running on renewable energy. I'm like, I feel good about it. I'm like, this is as clean as it gets.
I have one that's trained on every transcript of this podcast, and I use it,
Love it,
as a conversational piece with other stuff, as a thinking tool to figure out what themes I'm going to bring up and how I'm going to do them and everything else. And it's not writing for me. It's an assistant tool. And for me, it's fantastic. But so the question is, other than being pissed about this or seeing a world that's pro and anti-tech, or just, let's just resist the AI that's being shown. How do we organize?
I have an answer. I have a suggestion.
How do we build this? Like, so what do we do to not lose control of this future?
The first thing is we have to decouple LLM from bad. Because right now, what happens is if LLM is just fascist coded, authoritarian coded, which I understand why it is, then everything that can be of a benefit from this tool, and there are things like translating between languages or automatically captioning an image that are good, that an LLM can do.
Hundreds of millions of people use this every day and find useful things in it.
If all the benefits that those people get, or coding, which it's great for, if all those benefits can only come through enabling authoritarians who abuse people or people who don't care when a product tells a child to self-harm, if that's the only path to those benefits, we all lose.
Yep.
And right now, the people who are like, kill these apps with fire, like they're justifiably angry, but what they're doing is they're fusing these things together, right? They're like, the only AI is like Musk AI, right?
There's no good AI. There's no RAI. There's no...
Right. So what we have to do is say the negative traits of the current AI are not intrinsic to the tech, right? And like, for me, my personal view is like, the problem is big tech, because like, even if you got rid of all the AI in the world, you'd still have all these immense harms. Like they're doing lots of bad things, right? Like Facebook was doing horrible things before they had any LLMs. So then we say, like, let's form a rubric about what is good and bad, right? And if you say, like, I'm concerned about environmental impact, because like, by the way, like transcoding video at 4K has enormous environmental impact. And
we don't think about it all the time. People upload
all kinds of stuff,
years of content every minute to YouTube
that they don't use, right? So so we have like let's come up with a rubric of like what's acceptable and what's not, one. And then two, like for me, again, my view, I'd be like, what does a worker-owned LLM look like? Because we used to have worker-owned factories. And then if we say a worker-owned, peer-owned, consumer-first, user-centric, human-centric version of an LLM, and like, again, my list would be like, reduce the environmental impact, train on consensually gathered data, run open source, open weights, run locally, like be inspectable so that I can actually observe what it's doing, all these kinds of things. That's a minimum list, but let's start there. If I had those, and I do on my current model, I'm like, okay, I feel like I can, in good conscience, run this. Now, it's hard to set up. Like, it's got to be usable. All this stuff. Okay, fine. It's all of that. But if I can have that in a box, push a button, run that, and it's like as good as a frontier model was 6 or 9 months ago, I'm a pig in mud, baby. I'm happy, right? That's the first part. And then if we can get people to say, this is okay. This one's okay. You have control over it, and teach people this has the green check mark, right? This has the happy seal. This is one to run if you want to run an AI that you can feel good about. 2, this is the thing where if you hate AI, tell people use this at least instead of that one, right? This is how you sort of strike back. You don't have to use it yourself.
The fair trade option, the organic option.
Exactly. And it's really important because the abolitionist position is not going to work overall. There's too much entrenchment. And I think it's hard to say that because people are like, stop using the inevitability argument. And I understand why they push back on that. And I the thing I got to say is like the grief I have over, just take Facebook. Like we pushed back so hard in the early days of social media, like got to decentralize, got to use all these alternatives. We're building all these platforms, all this interop. And we failed, right? And for me, it's very personal where like, I know some of the activists that stopped Facebook from doing free basics in India, and it was incredible.
Yep.
And I'm so impressed by them and so proud of what they did. And it is really meaningful. And then Facebook went next door and did free basics in Myanmar. And
we saw what happened.
The Rohingya genocide happened less than a year later, right? Us being like, don't use Facebook didn't work, right?
No.
And if we'd have said, I don't care, make the shittiest, fastest Facebook clone you can and get there. Just get there. Give them something, anything that does what this does. It could have made a difference. You know what I mean? Like hold your nose and suck it up. And I know what your principles are and you're right. And we're going to do it anyway. And just ship. And actually, interop V2 or V never. Just get it out the door and give it to them. Let them own it. Let the people of Myanmar put it in their language and do it. Let the Rohingya people run it.
I mean, because, the Myanmar case, they spent all this effort lobbying to get internet access and only bothered to hire one person who spoke Burmese.
Later too. Like after it was too late.
Who lived in Ireland and wasn't even up at the time of the day when people were things. So, I think that
I say all this to say now where we have schools deploying ChatGPT as it has already cost 10 kids their lives? Right?
Yep.
For our community, I don't know how it could be all hands on deck. Like we have to get a thing in teachers' hands where they can say, no, we already have a tool. We're not deploying ChatGPT at this school. We already have a tool. It's free. These hacktivists gave it to me and it's good enough. And the kids are already using it. You know what I mean? like it's already, I don't know where they got it. They found it on the street corner and somebody, like it has to be like dirty, hackable. And the thing that gives me hope is looking at Gastown and Ralph and, these other open source tools, because those feel like hacker stuff. They're like, worse is better and good enough and Grassroots and everything Simon Willison does, like that kind of like, just make it run. That stuff, I'm like, if we get that caliber of stuff, a little more usable, accessible, but if we get a run your own, good enough, like I said, like Frontier -6 caliber piece that we get ubiquitous, just on everybody's machine, really, really fast, and it overwrites your host's file and redirects attempts to go to ChatGPT or something. You know what I mean? Like really aggressive because like they're playing for keeps. You know what I mean? Like they are going for everything. And so what would it take to do what they do as aggressively as meta product managers go? That's it. That's the game.
And we have examples of a grassroots resistance like that. We saw it in piracy. We saw it in we saw it in people insisting on using web browsers. We saw it in people setting up it's it sounds like a crazy idea. It sounds like, oh, how the hell are we going to get everyone to do this? But that's how we started sharing MP3s. That's how we started doing
went that fast.
cars and
Firefox went that fast. It's not, these are in living memory. These are not science fiction.
It's important to remember that we have victories in the past.
100%.
We've been talking for a long time. This has been incredibly wonderful. I am so thankful for all of your work and for getting to this and really not saying, like, how do we find a progressive alternative to this future of AI that isn't just reject it all? It's how do we use it? How do we make it ours? And how do we not repeat the mistakes of how we lost this battle for social media?
We had to learn a lesson, and I think we have. And people have to understand they have so much power, And I think hopefully this time people will get that. I think we operated the last time around as if we had no power. And we were in a fearful crouch, desperately trying to knit together things. And I think this time to just move with the confidence of knowing we have all the power in the world.
Thank you so much, Anil.
Thank you.
Thanks again to Anil Dash for coming on Revolution.Social. Our intro and outro music is a remix of the Italian anti-fascist song Bella Ciao, courtesy of White Records.
This episode was edited and produced by Eric Johnson from lightningpod.fm. Our executive producer is me, Alice Chan from Flock Marketing.
To learn more about the Social Media Bill of Rights and sign up for our email newsletter, visit Revolution.Social.
And for more interviews like this one, follow Revolution.Social on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Nostos, Fountain.fm, or wherever you get your podcasts.
And to paraphrase the Zapatistas' Subcomandante Marcos, we need a social media revolution to make revolution possible. We'll be back next week. See you then.